what's up, y'all? We just had a great debate on the Second Amendment, which was a lot of fun. We just started to unravel that one, and I think we're going to have a lot of shows on it with Refounding Fathers. Yeah, but this show, Conservatism on Tap, is always a pleasure and a great chance to like relax a little bit, especially coming off something heavy like that. So always a pleasure to be joined by my brother John over there on the far side. Love that
What's going
sign,
on?
love that background. You're looking great, man. How are things?
It's going pretty well. Regulations are loosening up in Virginia all around, so
Finally.
everyone's going outside. There's traffic all over the place now.
That's how Florida's been, for months and months. So, welcome back to reality, welcome to the
I
real world.
know. I feel
I
good.
this tells you where Florida's at. Is I went into an airport and a guy was like, "Hey, where's your mask?" And I looked at him like, "Are you serious?" Right? Because I was like, "Oh, I think I still have it." And then I picked it out of my pocket and it had lint all over it because I'd washed my pants with it in there. Nowhere else have I been asked that question in weeks and weeks. So that's
Yeah, we were trying to do some spring cleaning, and we had this huge piano that was just gifted to us when we moved into the house. Like it was from the previous owner; they didn't want to deal with it. It's out of tune. We ended up like getting it out of the house, sold it. But we said you have to pick it up yourself. And the people came out and they had their masks on, and they're like, "Oh, are y'all cool with the mask?" I'm like, "Whatever y'all need, we're vaccinated, we're fine." But they needed help to get it down, and like it was like, "Where's the mask? Where's this mask?" I'm like, "Okay, all right." But like trying to get this huge piano like down like six steps, and I know it doesn't sound much, but like this piano is gigantic. It weighs a ton.
Yeah.
And you're like just sitting there breathing through the mask. It's like gonna pass out. Like, why are y'all wearing a mask?
I've seen people doing that. I was at we were at a water park this weekend with our kids, and there was just a handful of people. I guess they're probably from out of town, and they were wearing masks while trying to like walk up the stairs for the slides, and they were like hurting. I was like, yeah, like do your thing. I mean, whatever helps, And then of course, like, then you see their mask like, floating in the water, because they went down the slide. Did it do anything? I don't know. Anyway, so let's get to catch up with you, man, and hear how life is going. Josh Lewis from Saving Elephants, welcome back to the show, man. Always a pleasure to have you on as well. So, how are things?
Always good to be here. Oh, pretty good. It's not quite as relaxed in Oklahoma, but we're getting there. Life's just about back to normal.
That's awesome, man. That's good to hear. No, we talked about your podcast episode with Jonah Goldberg. That was awesome, and I'm sure you have a lot of other big stuff coming. So appreciate what you do. And then
I should give a shout out because we've got his co-host Cal Davenport, Seth Root.
Nice.
Cal's co-host was on my most recent episode, so I should give a shout to him here.
There you go. That's awesome. Yeah, Cal, welcome back, man. I know you had your birthday. Was it last week? I think, and then you were down my way in Florida, Disney World, right?
Hey.
Yes, I was, and I think one of the things I noticed was, I mean, Disney kind of does their own things when it comes to masks.
They do.
So I was kind of surprised to hear you say that, like, people have been sort of, following the loosening of the regulations around different parts of Florida. Even when I was at the Orlando airport, I don't think I saw anybody without masks. So
yeah, the airports are still very strict. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it was an interesting experience, but we actually got there just as they were loosening. They used to have a right to wear masks outside all the time when it was 80, 90 plus degrees,
Right.
and they had just loosened that. So when you were outside, you didn't have to wear them, and that was a great relief that we avoided that. So
I read that.
And then Josh, I have to say, I think that Seth was happy that it was just a one Burkean and one Straussian. It wasn't 2-on-1 like when we had you on the show last
time. I deliberately didn't. As much as I love having you on my podcast, Cal, I kept you off of this one because we just beating up on him too much. Although I'll be honest, a 2-to-1 Burkean Straussian ratio that's kind of how I like it.
I think that's honestly less common, especially in academia these days. So
it is.
Yeah.
Well, that just kind of goes to what we talk about so much is there are all these different perspectives within conservatism. We were just talking on the other show about the Second Amendment, and I was kind of letting the libertarian and the liberal know, like, hey, there's debate within conservative circles about, gun rights and how unrestricted the Second Amendment actually makes them, its purpose and its context and things like that. It's like we don't all agree on that, and I think that's that's healthy, is to have that debate. And the same thing with your philosophers and how you see history and modernity and all those things going from Burke to Strauss and things like that. It's very healthy to have those discussions. We're looking forward to having more. Before we get to some of that on this show, though, it's always a custom here. We talk about what are you drinking, and I've been doing yard work all weekend. We did the water park yesterday. I've been doing yard work, so I am enjoying some of my go-to here. It's a chocolate mint whiskey, right? Take a look at that. There we go. So some Balatin right there. It's so good. I do put a little mixer in there, just a little bit of Diet Coke, but you barely need any of it. It's fantastic, and it's only
I fuck up with that
yeah,
coffee.
it's only 30%. So it's even not that heavy. So it's just a great sipping whiskey. A lot of good flavor in there. Nothing too fancy, but it's not bad for the summer. What do you got, John?
Sounds good. I laid off the stouts. I listened to Chris. Chris, if you're tuning in, is this for you? Okay. I went over to my local grocery store and I found a Devil's Backbone.
There it is.
See if you can see it right there. It's called Loved by the Sun.
That looks fantastic.
And this one's a peach mango. So I would say that like the stout person and he says, oh, wow, I didn't know the Devil's Backbone makes wine coolers. But it does taste extremely good. It has a really good peach flavor. And I've been outside all day. I've been cleaning up the cars, washing them down. I had the kids involved, went over to the dump, did a lot of spring cleaning. It's like when you come back inside, like I think this is like my third one.
Yeah.
So
that's
easy.
Try that one. That's awesome. Do they make other flavors, or is it just that peach mango?
Yeah. Well, I bought like the 12 pack, and so they're all the samplers. They've got like a strawberry, they've got watermelon, they've got a guava, passion fruit.
Oh, there you go.
And extremely tart. So I kind of steered clear of that one. But the peach and the watermelon are actually not too Jolly Ranchery.
Yeah,
so
that sounds
good.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get some of that and bring it on the show next time. So
Good stuff.
That's awesome, man. Well, good deal. So I do want to kind of focus on the main big topic tonight and jump right into it. For the sake of time, we're just going to go straight into this. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot. Is you guys were just talking about Strauss versus Burke debates and things like that, the different flavors of conservatism and how people see it. And I think in a sense we all kind of, simply by nature of tying ourselves to a philosopher of any kind, you kind of set yourself apart of more of the populist conservatives. Going back to Josh's interview with Jonah Goldberg, where they were talking about the different forms of conservatism being an instrument. You have the loud song, that is just taken over right now, and it is so much about the news cycle and posting something every day that tends to be fairly extremist. And yet, here we are talking about classical conservatism and, previous philosophers who've inspired us in books and all this stuff. And I wonder how does that become relevant, because you think, I read about Russell Kirk and how he was this prominent, philosopher and writer and thought leader of his time. And I wonder now how we can get to that point, because it seems like, Candace Owens is our thought leader, I guess, now, is like Charlie Kirk, who spends most of his time arguing against Biden and his policies, very, very focused on the day to day. Are these our leaders now? How do we actually get people who are rich in the philosophy of conservatism to become prominent without boring everybody to tears? I guess that's the challenge that I have for you guys. Is we have this world where it seems, the world of Instagram, where people are just going from one thing to the next every few minutes, and hey, you got to post 30 times in a day, in order to be relevant. And so much of it is based upon just very crude humor and violence and things that a lot of writers like these guys, like Burke there to the left, I don't think would condone. So how do we do this? How do we, branch what we're doing, the discussions that we're having, beyond just small isolated cells? And what does classical conservatism have to do as both a thought process and a movement to be able to compete, and to be able to, capture people's imaginations? Big question. So whoever wants to jump into it, I've certainly got thoughts, but I want to hear from you guys as well.
Yeah, so I'll just kick us off, because this made me think of a book and a website actually that's out there you can go to. It's called The Art of Manliness. Has anybody ever gone there?
Oh
Read
yeah.
it? Yeah. So
Yeah,
I just think that it's
the guys
really,
in charge of that blog, John, are actually just a couple of miles down the street from me.
really, oh,
Yeah,
nice.
they're here local.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at the website, if you look at the book, like it's all about just reimagining and then like regaining this art of what it means to be a man. Right. And it sounds like, okay, what is that? But I like how it takes a concept like manliness and it makes it into this art form. And it uses some like old timey imagery to talk about like not just the proper, etiquette of manliness, but also like, here's, you definitely need to have these tools here, in case like your car flips over and you got to cut your seatbelt out. Oh, and you also you should probably learn how to dance, whenever you court a woman. And this is how you tie a tie, and this is how you shave your beard, and all these kind of things. And it's some of it's like really humorous, some of it's extremely practical, but they managed to like take that concept of their take of what it means to be a man and create it into a website and create it into this art form that I really, really liked. And I think that when it comes to, say, classical conservatism, I think it's about regaining our arts, right? That conversation itself is an art. Discussion is an art. I work in an environment that is heavy in customer service, but I train my employees to say that conversation is an art. You can just provide the service, but sometimes people want more. They want a little bit more out of it. So how do you have that kind of conversation? Now, that doesn't really answer how you get it to be a popular thing, but I believe that whenever you can get back to the arts of, say, understanding philosophy, understanding conversation, manliness, those kind of things, I think you are touching on something that's conservative, and it can be done.
Interesting. Real quick, I want to answer Elizabeth Gussman's question. She was just asking if we allow women on the show. You are more than welcome. Like, we need your perspective, especially when we're wrestling with deep questions like this. More than happy to have anybody on the show who wants to be on. Whatever comments you want to throw down, doesn't matter to me whether it's a guy or a girl. We welcome the perspective of anybody who wants to jump on. But responding to what you said, John, I guess where I'm coming from with this is I think a lot of times the more thoughtful intellectual conservatives tend to kind of dismiss Trump, right? They dismiss the Trump movement and what he did, what he stood for, because Trump wasn't exactly like a philosophic guy, right? Like, he had trouble, spelling Marine Corps, like, let alone being able to like, find his thought in the historical or philosophical narrative, of human history. So he wasn't that, but that doesn't dismiss his effectiveness at being able to engage emotion, build it up, and
Right.
able to provide essentially a service to people that they wanted. And I mean, you talk about his rallies. So Cal, if maybe not down in Orlando or whatever, but if you come up here to like Pensacola, like there were huge rallies, right? There are still all these like Trump signs and there are stores and things like that people have set up. It's very much like Trump country in certain parts, of southern states like Florida, as well as many others. And the environments that he created, some people would think of it as tacky. He's got the off red hat, things like that. But it worked. People walked away from those things and they were fired up, right? They felt positive. So people would say things like, I felt more hopeful about my country than I have in decades, right? After walking away from a Trump rally, because I felt like we were going to actually, make some change and not just see moderation all the time. And I guess that's the thing, is that Trump was able to take a right-wing agenda and then boom, push it to the forefront, engage a whole lot of people, and ultimately, sure, like the things that he accomplished may or may not stand the test of time, but you can't deny that he was extremely and still is relevant. I mean, there's a business model there that really worked, for him. Maybe not in every facet that he wanted, but it certainly encountered some success that a lot of people did not see coming. So, I get what you're saying, John, about, hey, there's some things that we need to do and we need to engage art. But I'm kind of thinking as well as how do you engage emotion with, a book like this, right? So you take like a book like, Russell Kirk's take on Emma Burke, which I think is fantastic, by the way. But in the working world, like who's going to sit down and read the 250 pages, of this book and then try to figure out how to apply it to their life, right? Not somebody with 3 or 4 kids, I can tell you that, right? So if you missed it in college, what do you do? So, anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, I love what John said there, because when I first started communicating about politics, I was at a bunch of blogs where the expectation was, and this is how many people get started, you had to respond to a dozen things in the news every day. You couldn't sit back and have something thoughtful. It had to be, and we have untold numbers of conservatives writing blogs like this. But what's great about the Art of Manliness site is that they take a different way of communicating that really catches on. And it's almost like they feel sort of like the listicles on BuzzFeed or something like that. And then they put it into something that's actually digestible and usable and relevant.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to sort of think about the different mediums that we use to convey conservative ideas. And what occurred to me when you asked this question, Wes, is I've been reading this book on C.S. Lewis on politics and the natural law, and the authors make this really interesting point that C.S. Lewis himself sort of began to doubt the efficacy, like how effective he would be writing nonfiction. And he started to turn later in his life away from nonfiction and towards fiction, and sort of disarming people through stories, through fiction, through fantasy and that sort of thing, to get his ideas in that way, instead of trying to engage people's reason that he thought was no longer working. And I think that there's a lesson in there, even if we're not looking at to do exactly what Lewis was trying to do, that we need to find other mediums than just politics to get these ideas across, where people's minds are going to be open to thinking about and seeing how conservative ideas fit into just the narrative of life and into stories and things like that, and trying to get our values across that way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's fantastic. I mean, everybody loves movies, right? Like that is a huge part of American culture. Is we won't read a book, but we will definitely turn on a Netflix show, right? Like, and you look at a show like a great one to me is, and Josh is going to flinch whenever I say this because I said it so much for like months, but Cobra Kai brought in like some traditional family values, right? Like, and it did it in such a funny and very like distinctly 80s way that like anybody who was at all attached to those years like recognized what they were doing. But things like that can reinsert, oh, that's right, like having a father figure in your life is a good thing, which is a traditional value. You may not say that's conservative necessarily, but it's certainly a part of what we believe, right? So there's all kinds of ways to be able to shift the culture debate, and people would never tie it back to classical conservatism as such. And yet they're kind of following things that everyone from Russell Kirk and William F. Buckley and Ronald Reagan would all agree with are important. So, what are your thoughts, Josh?
Yeah, every art form is going to have its limitations and its strength, right? And it seems like on the right, kind of to Cal's point, we have a lot of people on the right, some of them effective, some of them not so much, doing the punditry. We have a lot of the intellectuals, the elitists, writing these big, thick books that only some of us have time to read. And then we have a lot of them doing the sort of Donald Trump monster truck mash, high energy kind of arena events. But I think there's also a lot of other stuff in the middle missing. And Wes, maybe this is, I don't want to say plain devil's advocate, but maybe somewhat counterfactual to what you're saying. I agree with you that Donald Trump has been able to reach a large mass of people, and more power to him. But in my mind, I don't know if what we're trying to do is necessarily bridge the gap between highbrow intellectual conservatism and that sort of emotional appeal. I think there is truly something in the middle that, you cite Russell Kirk, for example, when he wrote The Conservative Mind. That was a pretty popular book. I mean, it was purchased by lots of people that themselves were not political scientists. And that is a thick, difficult book. I mean, it goes on for 9 pages about the British corn laws in the 1800s. Like, what the heck? What am I supposed to do with this? I don't think we're necessarily needing something like that today, but I guess where I'm going with that is I think part of the problem is we treat far too many people less intelligent than they actually are. I think sometimes we don't give people enough credit, and we feel a need to dumb down and simplify a message. And I'm not saying it all has to be highbrow. I mean, certainly we can find ways to entertain and try to engage, especially to Cal's point, trying to find speaking through the arts. But I think people are usually more intelligent than we often give them credit for. And we try to summarize politics and get it digestible in a means that works through a focus group, but doesn't necessarily fit the heart. It doesn't hit that higher imagination that Kirk often talks about.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Very good point.
No, definitely. I think that, Josh, just what you had me thinking about is just the people have so many avenues about their own life. Sure they might gather for, one particular person and show one particular emotion, but people are complicated, right? They have so many different facets in their life. And I think part of it too is that they are trying to look for a synergy in their own life. And seeing how that outlet can, what outlet can they finally have in that? And, for Trumpers, for many of them, they might have felt left behind by globalization. They might have felt, stirred up in anger or inspiration for America. But I think that the more that we can try and treat people like they are a truly holistic person and synergize through the arts, through good stories, and hopefully appealing to higher emotions than just, be angry at the other side for what they took away from you. And I think that's the key here, because it's hard to get past that narrative. It's hard to get past the bitterness, and to find what we have in common, and that we build better together. Because right now it seems like there is that strong divide. But one thing I brought this up to Wes before, but I want to feature it. There's a movie called Good Will Hunting, and if you haven't seen it, it's Robin Williams, Matt Damon. But it's two people that are at odds, even though it's a therapist and they're counselee. And Robin Williams is trying to get into Matt Damon's head, and Matt Damon is just finding ways to push the right buttons to turn Robin Williams away and just end the conversation, as if he knows them. I know that painting was done by your wife and she's dead and it sucks. And Robin Williams leaves in anger. But then he comes back and he kind of challenges Matt Damon in a way where he says, I've had a life that has been lived. And if you want to learn about that, we can talk. I bet you have a life that you've lived too. Let's talk about that. But don't you dare, think that just because you saw one painting and you insulted it, that you know me. And I like that it's that blend of aggressiveness, kind of shaming, but then also this supportive of I bet you can do better. I bet you are better. I bet you've lived better. So, tell me about that. But I think that's something that I feel is a part of that art of conversation to have, even among other conservatives, just to get to a better grounding.
Yeah, I've got a clip of it here. Take a look. Watch a couple minutes.
Yeah.
What's this? Taster's choice moment between guys. This is really nice. You got a thing for swans? Is this like a fetish? It's something maybe we need to devote some time to?
I thought about what you said to me the other day about my painting. Stayed up half the night thinking about it. Something occurred to me. I fell into a deep, peaceful sleep and haven't thought about you since. You know what occurred to me?
No.
You're just a kid. You don't have the faintest idea what you're talking about.
Why, thank you.
It's all right. You've never been out of Boston.
Nope.
So if I asked you about art, you'd probably give me the skinny on every art book ever written. Michelangelo. I know a lot about him. Life's work, political aspirations, him and the Pope, sexual orientation, the whole works, right? I bet you can't tell me what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel. You've never actually stood there and looked up at that beautiful ceiling. Seen that. If I ask you about women, you'd probably give me a syllabus of your personal favorites. You may have even been laid a few times. But you can't tell me what it feels like to wake up next to a woman and feel truly happy.
All right, that's good. I think you get the point there.
You're a tough kid.
Yeah, it's a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
Make that
And
distinction. I love it. What you're saying, John, is like there is this higher ethos, right? There is this higher level of existence that I feel like in American politics is not being touched or utilized or even sought, right? I did a show on Wednesday about the permanent things. So a little redemption there for Russell
Hmm.
Kirk, Josh, is he did at times go, on these tangents, but he had these beautiful concepts, and I think this one he got from T.S. Eliot, but he was great at popularizing it, is this notion that there are things that are fundamental to existence that are above us, or that, the sea in which we swim, it exists before and after we're gone. And we don't even talk about that right now, right? Like all we talk about is the fact that, Kamala Harris used to hang out and probably sleep with, Montel Williams or something, like that. That's where the debate is, right? We're not even seeking this aspect of existence, and that's what Robin Williams is talking about, right, John?
absolutely. And I feel like if I could like release a book, I'd probably take a piece out of Art of Manliness and call it like the Art of Peaceliness, if it didn't sound so like I don't know Taoist or whatnot. But I think that if we could find a way where we appeal to those higher things, like you said, Wes, like the more permanent things. How do you live contemplating the permanent things? How do you live a satisfying life? And what about that is conservative? I think those are, more fulfilling questions leading to more fulfilling answers. Might not get someone elected, but I do think it highlights how we engage, on a local level towards one another.
Yeah. Josh Cow, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that if we are able to get people in touch with the permanent things, who gets elected will matter less
Mm.
to them. I think that that's been a poor substitute for the sense that we're connected with things and people who came before us and people who will come after us and um, the universe and God and natural law and things like um, that are maybe a little bit higher than who wins the next presidential election
Yeah.
and that we can do to get us in touch with that. I think that it can shift our focus in a way that would be very healthy for us.
Yeah.
Cal said it great. It's not that elections aren't important. They're very important, but it's difficult for a populace to elect good leaders if they're not oriented in the right direction. It's to focus on those permanent things that pull us away from the anger, right, from the hatred, from some of the emotions driving our debate, and tap us into those healthier emotions of gratitude and love and peace.
Yeah, I remember being a kid, and there was these movements that came from more spiritual culture than anything, or religious culture. And you had your "What Would Jesus Do" wristband. You had like DC Talk, who was taking popular music and Christianizing it with the lyrics and stuff. And you had Mercy Me, right? A band that did a song on "I Can Only Imagine" that wanted people to consider heaven, right, in their daily life. And I think we need more of that. I think we need more of those type of like movements in our daily lives that cause people to take a step back from the news cycle and the fighting and everything else, and to reflect on these things. So I think that's fantastic. I think that's there are many times where I've said lots of positive things about Trump and recognized his business skill, his data management, his marketing, the way he used political incorrectness, the way he formed movements, the way he won the presidency. There's all these good things, that I think that he demonstrated that was lacking in Republican politics. But one of the biggest critiques I have of Trump and the movement itself is that it doesn't show character or virtue, or like you said, John, like manliness. It doesn't show virtue as this lifelong pursuit. I mean, so many people on the right were having to make excuses for Trump's behavior because he was acting like he was
Mm.
16, right? He was saying things that were terrible, and they would say things like, "Oh, he's just a baby Christian. He'll figure it out at some point," even though he's older than like your grandfather, right? They were making all these excuses for how he acted. Um, and we get to this point where character, personal character didn't really matter, in terms of the movement, right? And
Yeah.
we just missed out on this, this lifelong pursuit of virtue that I think that we need to recover. And maybe you're right. Maybe you guys are right. Politics isn't necessarily the right venue, but I do think that people need some type of moral leadership to get there. I mean, you think about like Martin Luther King and what he did to race relations and how he led an entire generation and then some into kind of
Mhm.
a noble pursuit of equality as opposed to a hateful one. And sure, he wasn't a politician, but he was a moral leader that people looked to. And instead, I mean, we spent 5 minutes of our other show talking about Demi Lovato, who wants to be referred to as they instead of he or she, right? Like that's where we are at. You know, if you want to take politics out of it, well, you know, our media culture isn't all that much better. So anyway, you know, this is a big question, but it's something that's on my mind a lot. Is how can we take these guys and take their thought and then become leaders and work together to be and to be able to communicate it in a way that speaks the language, maybe elevated somewhat, but speaks the language of our generation and the ones to come.
Mm. Yeah.
Big question, but I appreciate the thoughts here. You guys have given a lot. You've definitely given me a lot to think about in terms of how we do that.
I think it's a good jumping off point. I mean, I think that you can continue this conversation as well and start from, how do we get these, how do you understand these classical authors in a more modern way? Communicate them in a way, even if that means that they're in somewhat invisible. How do you live it, right? Which is kind of, I think, what we were more or less talking about this evening. And then how does that gain traction? How does that gain into a movement? What part does social media play? What part does local grassroots organizing play and that sort of thing? But I think there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, but and to some extent, we're doing this every day. I mean, I see what you guys do in terms of your lives, and the things that we're having this show. And Josh and Kyle, you have your own, and John, you've helped me build this thing up, and we're doing this every week, right? We're making it relevant for ourselves, and I think as we get better at showing how classical conservatism, traditional ideals, and the beliefs that we hold matter to us, they're relevant in our own life. Really, in some ways, it's an easier question if you just think about it that way. Is it's already relevant to us? It's just explaining that to other people. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
look at what I found in this stack of books that has changed the decisions that I make on a daily, basis for the better. Right? It's just explaining that, figuring out how to do that, in some type of way. Because at the end of the day, we do want people to be hopeful. There's so much to be grateful for and joyful about and inspired, and it's a deeper feel than what politics offers to begin with, right? And that's what I think a lot of the conservative authors were saying. So anyway, I want to give you guys a chance if you've got any final thoughts. John, I appreciate everything you said. I love that movie and bringing in Good Will Hunting into it is a great addition to what we're talking about. Josh, Cal, any final thoughts for you guys? I appreciate every time you guys make time, time to be on the show. It's always a blessing to us.
Well, I'm with John. I don't think we solved this problem tonight. I think it's the opening of it. It's a great conversation. It's a great question, but it's worth further consideration.
Absolutely. And Kyle, any final thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, I just have to reiterate that thought exactly. I think that the important thing for tonight is just opening it up. I wonder if our viewers have thoughts on this as well, and I think that this needs to be a widespread conversation for people who are just hungry for something other than Twitter wars and blog posts and things like that.
Absolutely. No, thank you guys for saying that. I appreciate it. And we'll keep wrestling with it. It gives us a lot of stuff to focus on, and maybe we can look at some people, in the next couple episodes who are doing this, and start to support them more and things like that, and kind of draw more attention to them. So thank you guys for being on the show. Thanks for coming out of your Sundays. Always a pleasure to have the three of you on this show and to wrestle with these big questions. Don't forget that we have on our shows, we've also got our Facebook, our YouTube, our Twitter, Instagram. You can go to our website, thebreakingconservative.com. Don't forget Saving Elephants podcast with Josh, and then In the Trenches with Cal Davenport. Look at what these guys are doing. It's incredible. On a daily basis, they're putting out all kinds of good stuff, and especially, recently with all the big guests they've had on, it's a lot of cool stuff there. And then, John, thank you for helping me put this together every week. It's a lot of fun. So you guys have a great rest of the week, and I'll catch up with you next Sunday.
Take care.